January 14, 1945. Western Netherlands. Frozen canal 2 kilometers east of Arnhem. 23 men lay prone on the ice. British commandos, 2nd Special Service Brigade. White camouflage smocks covered their uniforms. Weapons: Lee Enfield rifles, Sten guns, Bren light machine guns, grenades. They had been motionless for 11 minutes. Breath condensed in small clouds despite efforts to breathe shallowly. The ice beneath them was 30 centimeters thick. Temperature -8 degrees Celsius. Ahead, across 120 meters of open frozen canal, a German observation post occupied a brick pump house. 2 stories, windows facing the canal. Smoke rose from a chimney. Intelligence indicated 4 to 6 soldiers stationed there. Radio equipment. Regular observation schedules. The post controlled sightlines across the canal and into the British-held sector. It needed to be eliminated before larger operations could proceed. The assault plan was simple: cross the ice at night, eliminate the observation post silently, destroy the radio, withdraw before dawn. Standard raiding doctrine. The team had trained for 3 days. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Movement had been silent. Approach positions were reached without detection. Now they waited for the signal to advance. The officer in command, a captain, lay at the center of the formation. His hand was raised, visible in the darkness. The hand had not moved. No signal had been given. The men watched the hand. The hand remained raised, frozen in position. Time: 03:47 hours. 7 minutes until the scheduled assault. The 2nd Special Service Brigade had been operating in the Arnhem sector since October 1944, conducting reconnaissance and limited raids across German-held territory. The September airborne operation, Market Garden, had failed to secure the bridge at Arnhem. British forces had withdrawn across the Rhine, establishing defensive positions on the southern bank. German forces controlled the northern side. The winter had been harsh. Movement was restricted. Combat was sporadic but continuous. The pump house observation post was one of several German positions monitoring the canal system. Allied intelligence had tracked its communications for 6 weeks. The post reported British positions, troop movements, and artillery coordinates. Eliminating it would create a temporary blind spot in German observation coverage. This would facilitate a larger patrol operation scheduled for January 16. The assault was a preliminary action, tactical rather than strategic, but operationally necessary. The commando team had departed their base at 22:00 hours on January 13. Movement was conducted in darkness across frozen terrain. They used farm tracks and frozen drainage ditches to avoid German patrols. Progress was slow. The temperature had dropped throughout the night. The canal ice was assessed as safe to cross. Local guides had confirmed thickness. The frozen surface would support individual soldiers moving carefully. It would not support vehicles or concentrated groups. The pump house itself was a standard Dutch agricultural structure: brick construction, slate roof. German modifications were minimal: sandbags at windows, radio antenna on the roof, blackout curtains. The building was isolated, no other structures within 200 meters. The nearest German strongpoint was 1 kilometer northeast. Reinforcements would require at least 15 minutes to arrive after alert. The assault window was narrow but sufficient if speed was maintained. Terrain provided no cover on the canal itself. The ice was flat, unbroken, visible under quarter moonlight. Anyone crossing would be exposed for approximately 90 seconds if moving at assault speed. The pump house windows offered excellent fields of fire across the canal. German defenders, if alert, could engage attackers while they were on the ice. The assault plan accounted for this: speed, darkness, surprise. First section would reach the building, secure entry points, eliminate defenders. Second section would provide covering fire from the British-held bank. Third section would cross after first section signaled successful entry. Weather conditions were optimal for night operations. Cloud cover was intermittent. Moonlight provided enough illumination for movement but not enough for easy observation at distance. Wind was light. Snow had stopped falling 3 hours earlier. Noise discipline was achievable. The ice surface was smooth, no crunching snow to betray movement. Everything aligned. The operation was feasible. The men were ready. The target was identified. The assault time had arrived. British commando training emphasized precision, speed, and violence of action. Night raids required absolute discipline. Silence until contact. Immediate overwhelming force upon engagement. Rapid consolidation and withdrawal. The philosophy was surgical. Get in, accomplish the objective, get out. Casualties were expected but minimized through preparation and rehearsal. Each man in the assault team had completed specialized training in close-quarters combat, silent movement, and building clearance. They had conducted similar raids in France, Belgium, and Holland. They understood the mechanics: approach undetected, breach simultaneously at multiple points, eliminate resistance, destroy equipment, withdraw under covering fire. The sequence was practiced until reflexive. Individual roles were assigned and understood. The captain commanding the team had led 7 previous raids. All had been tactically successful. Casualties had been light. His reputation was solid, competent, careful, decisive. His subordinates trusted his judgment. He had briefed the operation thoroughly. Questions had been asked and answered. Contingencies had been planned. The team knew what to do if the assault was detected early, if resistance was heavier than expected, if withdrawal routes were compromised. Preparation had been thorough. Weapons were loaded and ready. The Sten gunners had cocked their weapons silently. Riflemen had rounds chambered. The Bren gun teams had their weapons positioned to provide suppressive fire across the canal if needed. Grenades were accessible in pockets and pouches. Explosives were prepared. Charges to destroy the radio equipment, incendiaries to deny the building to German use after withdrawal. Everything was in place. The expectation among the soldiers was clear. Within 5 minutes, they would be moving across the ice. Within 8 minutes, they would be entering the pump house. Within 12 minutes, the operation would be complete. This was the rhythm of night raiding: short, violent, successful. They had done it before. The mechanics were familiar. The nervousness was routine, adrenaline preparing the body for action. The waiting was normal. Assaults did not begin exactly on schedule. Minor delays were standard. The men waited. The captain's hand remained raised. At 03:51, 1 minute past the scheduled assault time, the hand was still raised, still no signal. The men began to notice the delay. Eyes shifted from the pump house to the captain's hand, then back. No one moved, discipline held. But the delay was becoming unusual. Training covered contingencies for aborted operations, changed enemy strength, compromised approach, unexpected obstacles. The signal for abort was different: hand lowered and clenched into a fist. The hand was raised, fingers extended. The signal meant, wait, prepare to advance. But the advance order had not come. The men waited. At 03:53, the captain's hand lowered slightly. Not the abort signal, not the advance signal. Just a small movement as though relaxing position. Then the hand rose again. Same position, fingers extended. The gesture meant nothing had changed. Wait, but the scheduled time had passed. 4 minutes past the assault time. The captain's head turned slowly. He was looking at the pump house, then at the ice between his position and the building, then back at the pump house. His posture did not suggest alarm or concern. He simply observed. The observation continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Then his head turned to look at his second in command, a lieutenant positioned 3 meters to his right. The 2 officers made eye contact. No words were exchanged. The distance was too great for whispers without risk of sound carrying across the ice. The lieutenant's expression showed a question. The captain's face was unreadable in the darkness. The lieutenant waited. No signal came from the captain. The lieutenant returned his attention to the pump house. At 03:56, 5 minutes past assault time, the captain's hand remained raised. No movement forward had been initiated. The first section, 8 men positioned closest to the captain, had shifted their weight slightly, preparing to rise and move. The movement had stopped. They remained prone. The tension in their postures was visible even in darkness, muscles ready, breaths held, waiting for the signal that would release them into action. The captain's hand lowered, fully this time, not into a fist, just lowered to his side. He did not move otherwise. The raised hand had meant, prepare to advance. The lowered hand meant nothing by itself, no established signal. The men remained frozen, now confused. The captain lay motionless. 6 minutes past assault time, the operation had not begun, and now the signal to prepare had been withdrawn. Time stopped having normal progression. Seconds felt longer. The cold became more noticeable, not unbearable, but present in a way it had not been during active preparation. Men shifted slightly to ease cramping muscles. Small movements only. Noise discipline was maintained, but the readiness that had been sharp began to dull. Adrenaline that had peaked expecting immediate action had nowhere to go. Bodies remained tense, but the tension changed quality. At 04:02, 10 minutes past assault time, one of the soldiers in the second section, a corporal, slowly moved his head to look at the lieutenant. The lieutenant was staring at the captain. The corporal looked back at the pump house. Smoke still rose from the chimney. No lights were visible. No movement. The building appeared exactly as it had appeared during the approach. Nothing had changed. Yet the assault had not begun. The lieutenant made a small gesture toward the captain, hand raised slightly, a question implied. The captain either did not see the gesture or chose not to respond. The lieutenant held position. His role was second in command. Initiative was not his unless the captain was incapacitated. The captain was clearly functional. Therefore, the lieutenant waited. His confusion was evident in the tension of his posture, but discipline held. At 04:07, the captain slowly rose to a crouch. The movement was deliberate, controlled. He did not stand fully. He remained low, presenting minimal silhouette. The men watched him. Several began to rise slightly, anticipating the order to advance had finally come. The captain raised his hand again, palm out this time, fingers spread. The signal meant, stay down, do not move. The men froze in various stages of rising, then settled back to prone positions. The captain remained in his crouch, observing the pump house. A full minute passed. He lowered himself back to prone. His hands moved to adjust his position. He settled as though preparing for a long wait. This was now clearly not a brief tactical delay. Something had changed. The men did not know what. No signal had been given to abort. No signal had been given to advance. The operation existed in suspension. At 04:12, 15 minutes past assault time, the first light of false dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. Not true dawn, that would come 90 minutes later, but the faint lightening that preceded it. The tactical window was narrowing. Night operations required darkness for both approach and withdrawal. With dawn approaching, the risk of detection during withdrawal increased significantly. The captain surely understood this. Every man understood this. Yet no decision appeared to be forthcoming. The confusion was now universal among the team. Training had not prepared them for this scenario. Operations proceeded or were aborted. They did not simply pause indefinitely at the moment of execution. The psychological strain of sustained readiness without release began to show. More frequent small movements, adjustments of position, hands gripping weapons tighter than relaxing. The men remained disciplined. They did not speak. They did not break formation. They waited. The captain's report, filed 36 hours later, stated that upon final observation of the objective immediately prior to assault, he assessed that conditions had changed in ways not reflected in intelligence briefings. Specifically, he noted that smoke from the pump house chimney indicated a stove or heating source in active use, suggesting occupancy levels potentially higher than estimated. Additionally, he observed that window blackout discipline appeared less rigorous than during previous reconnaissance. Faint light was visible at one window, suggesting personnel were awake and potentially alert. The report further stated that reassessment of ice conditions during the approach revealed surface texture variations that had not been apparent during earlier reconnaissance. Specifically, certain areas showed stress patterns suggesting recent partial thawing and refreezing, potentially compromising load-bearing capacity. The captain judged that sending 23 men across the ice simultaneously risked ice failure, which would result in catastrophic casualties and mission failure. Finally, the report noted that operational timeline had been disrupted by slower than anticipated approach movement due to unexpected German patrol activity in adjacent sectors. This delay compressed the assault window to the point where post-assault withdrawal before dawn could not be guaranteed. The captain determined that proceeding with the assault under these modified conditions represented unacceptable risk relative to tactical benefit. These explanations were procedurally acceptable. Operations were aborted or modified based on commander assessment of changed conditions. The captain's judgment was within his authority. No criticism was recorded in official files. The report was acknowledged and filed. The operation was rescheduled for a future date under different conditions. What actually occurred in the captain's assessment during those minutes on the ice cannot be determined with certainty from documentation. However, testimony from the lieutenant, given during a post-war interview in 1952, suggested additional factors. The lieutenant recalled that during the final observation, the captain had used field glasses to scan not only the pump house, but the surrounding area. He spent considerable time observing terrain beyond the immediate objective. The lieutenant's impression was that the captain had become concerned about factors not related to the pump house itself, but to the broader tactical situation. The lieutenant also mentioned that the captain had seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the intelligence estimate of enemy strength. During briefings, the captain had questioned the source of the estimate and the confidence level. He had been assured the estimate was reliable, but in the final moments the lieutenant believed the captain had decided the uncertainty was too great. The consequence of encountering stronger opposition than expected while on the ice would be total loss of the team. The captain was unwilling to accept that risk. The decision was made in silence and isolation. No consultation occurred. The captain observed, assessed, and decided. The decision was to not proceed. No dramatic moment of refusal, no speech or explanation. Simply a sustained non-action that transformed from tactical pause into operational abort. At 04:19, the captain made a hand signal, withdraw. The gesture was clear. The team responded immediately. Movement was slow and controlled, crawling backward on the ice, maintaining intervals, keeping noise to minimum. Withdrawal took 14 minutes. The team reached the British-held bank at 04:33 and moved into cover among frozen reeds and snow-covered embankments. No discussion occurred at the canal. The team formed up and began the return movement to base using the same route as approach. The captain led. The lieutenant brought up the rear. The men moved in silence. The return journey took 3 hours. Progress was slower than approach, fatigue, psychological deflation after the aborted operation, and increased German patrol activity as dawn arrived required more frequent halts and detours. The team reached base at 07:41 hours. Personnel were dismissed to rest. Weapons were cleaned and returned to storage. Equipment was inventoried. The routine post-operation procedures occurred without the usual post-action intensity. There had been no action. Men moved through the motions mechanically. Faces showed exhaustion, confusion, some frustration. No one spoke about what had happened. The captain went directly to the operations room to file his report. Debriefing occurred at 14:00 hours. The captain presented his assessment. Questions were asked by the brigade operations officer. The captain's answers were factual and professional. The decision to abort was accepted. The operations officer asked whether the mission should be rescheduled. The captain said additional reconnaissance was required before any decision could be made. The operations officer agreed. The briefing concluded. No criticism was expressed. No commendation was given. The operation simply entered the record as postponed. The men of the assault team dispersed to normal duties. Training continued. Other operations were planned and executed. The aborted raid on the pump house was not discussed. Military culture discouraged questioning command decisions. The captain had made a judgment call. That was his prerogative. The men had obeyed. That was their role. The operation had not occurred. Therefore, there was nothing to discuss. The pump house remained in German hands. Observation activities continued. The larger patrol operation scheduled for January 16 was modified to account for continued German observation coverage in that sector. Alternate routes were used. The tactical impact of the aborted raid was minimal. The pump house was eventually abandoned by German forces during their general withdrawal in late March 1945. It was never assaulted. It simply became irrelevant as the front moved eastward. No official recognition of the captain's decision appeared in any military records beyond his operational report. The report was filed with hundreds of similar documents recording operations conducted, postponed, or canceled during the winter of 1944-45. No investigation was conducted. No inquiry was made. The captain's service record shows no notation of the January 14 operation. His career continued without interruption. He received standard decorations for his service, but nothing specifically related to this incident. The 23 men who lay on the ice that night left no collective account. Individual service records show their participation in numerous operations during the war. The January 14 raid does not appear in citations or decorations. Some of these men later spoke generally about their service in oral history interviews or memoirs. None specifically mentioned the aborted pump house operation. It was one night among many nights of operations. Because nothing happened, there was nothing distinctive to remember or recount. Post-war historical accounts of British commando operations in the Netherlands focus on successful raids and notable actions. Operations that did not occur do not appear in operational summaries or historical analyses. The pump house raid is absent from published histories of the 2nd Special Service Brigade. Researchers examining archival materials would find the captain's report if specifically searching for January 1945 operations, but nothing in the document suggests significance beyond routine operational adjustments. The silence in the historical record is complete. An operation was planned, prepared, and executed through to the final moment before violence. Then it stopped. No shots were fired. No casualties occurred. No objective was taken or destroyed. The gap between preparation and execution is documented only in a brief report that explains the decision in procedural military language. The human dimension. Whatever calculations or instincts led the captain to hold his position and then withdraw is invisible. The soldiers involved carried the memory privately. Whether they agreed with the captain's decision, resented it, or understood it cannot be determined. Military discipline precluded public disagreement. Personal feelings were irrelevant to official records. The operation became one more experience in their wartime service, remembered or forgotten according to individual psychology. The collective silence preserved no conclusion about whether the right choice was made. The captain remained in military service after the war. He transferred to a staff position in 1946 and served until retirement in 1962 with the rank of colonel. His later career was unremarkable, competent service in various administrative and training roles. He did not write memoirs. He participated in one regimental reunion in 1971, but left no recorded remarks. He died in 1979. His obituary in the regimental journal noted his wartime service with the 2nd Special Service Brigade, but provided no operational details. Lieutenant emigrated to Canada in 1948 and worked in civilian security services. His 1952 interview was conducted by a military historian researching commando operations. The interview covered many topics. The January 14 operation occupied 2 pages of a 40-page transcript. The lieutenant's tone was factual and non-judgmental. He described what he observed, but offered no evaluation of the captain's decision. He died in 1987. Of the 23 men on the ice that night, 12 were killed or wounded in subsequent operations before war's end. 3 died in a raid on German positions near Venlo in February 1945. 4 were wounded during the Rhine crossing in March. 5 were killed during operations in Germany in April. The remaining 11 survived the war. Most returned to civilian occupations. A few remained in military service. None are known to have written accounts of the January 14 operation. The pump house was demolished in 1947 during post-war reconstruction. The canal was dredged and restored to normal function. The area became agricultural land again. A road was built along the former British defensive line in the 1960s. Housing development occurred in the 1980s. The location where 23 men lay on the ice preparing to assault is now beneath a residential street. No marker indicates what nearly occurred there. The operational archives containing the captain's report were transferred to the National Archives in 1978. The documents are accessible to researchers but are rarely examined. The winter of 1944-45 in the Netherlands is studied primarily in relation to Operation Market Garden and the subsequent Allied advance. Small unit commando raids receive minimal attention. The aborted pump house operation exists in the archive as one file among thousands, distinguished by nothing except its ultimate inconsequence. January 14, 1945, was one night in a war that lasted years. Thousands of operations were planned and executed. Some succeeded. Some failed. Some were modified or canceled. The pump house raid belongs in the last category, an operation that reached the threshold of violence and then stopped. Not through enemy action, not through accident or equipment failure, through human decision. The captain lay on the ice and chose not to give the order. His reasons, whatever combination of tactical assessment, intuition, doubt, or caution, led him to hold position until the operation became impossible to execute. Then he withdrew. The men followed. The night ended. The war continued elsewhere. The pump house remained standing. The German observers remained at their posts. The British commandos returned to base. Nothing changed except the absence of an action that had been planned. The operation that was stopped mid-breath left no mark on the landscape, no entry in history books, no story passed down through generations. It existed only in classified reports, fading memories, and the structural silence of archives that document what happened but cannot capture what did not. 23 men prepared to risk death, expected to act, and then simply withdrew into the darkness. The moment passed, the decision was made, and the silence that followed was complete. The ice on the canal melted 6 weeks later. The pump house was abandoned 2 months after that. The captain retired 17 years later and died 14 years after retirement. The lieutenant gave one interview and then disappeared into civilian life. The soldiers scattered into their separate futures. And the night when an assault reached the final instant before execution and then stopped, frozen in position, suspended in silence, dissolved into the past, leaving behind nothing except the absence itself. A raid that nearly occurred but did not, recorded nowhere except in the gap between what was planned and what was done.